Good afternoon. Point out his wonderful book over here, The Forger's Daughter, which he informs me our copies and Otto Pensler's copies, who's joining us, are the signed copies, and therefore a particular note. And we would certainly encourage you, we have a few left, to grab onto one. It's a wonderful read, as you were going to discover. Our other colleague today is Otto Penzler, whom we haven't seen for a very long time. Otto, as you know, is a noted bibliophile, bookseller, owner of the Mysterious Bookshop, publisher, and editor. And he is, in fact, Mr. Morrow's editor. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they interacted, or at least I hope they'll tell us how they interacted this afternoon. So, got to keep it no swearing, guys, but assuming it was all civil, here we go. So, tell us first, because we didn't have a chance to talk to you, Bradford. You wrote The Forger in what, 2014?
Yeah, it was about, 5 years ago, I guess.
Six.
6 years ago, and whatever it was. There's been another book in between. I wrote that thinking that was a one-off book, actually. I'd never had any thoughts when I was writing it of doing any kind of sequel. Although I did notice when I got to the end of the book, there were a lot of elements left that, undone, or that had promise for another narrative to come, arise from. So, but Otto and I were discussing it, and I think actually Otto suggested the title of this book, of the sequel, and after I finished this other long book, The Prague Sonata, I turned back to The Forgers again. It was very interesting to reread the book with the idea of a sequel, because I had to think in terms of how far in the future do I have to put this thing for it to work properly with ages and et cetera, with characters. But it's worked out just great.
It's interesting that often we have a discussion with authors about characters who are aging too fast in real time. Ian Rankin has had that issue, Michael Connelly and so forth. But I thought it was great that between 2014 and 2020, your guy Will actually aged 20 years.
Well, yeah, that's because he was originally, the book was set at around 1990. It worked out just great, in fact. I needed the daughter to be old enough to get herself into the forging, world. So it was really more about the daughter. Will could have been any age, really, so long as he was alive.
Gotcha. Otto, let's go back to 2014. You acquired the book, so what was it about The Forger that really got you excited enough to publish it?
Oh, I actually have a great origin story.
Oh, good.
I have a series of, in my bookshop, I have a series of stories called Biblio Mysteries, which are short stories, longer short stories, with a book or the world of books in somehow as a background. And I asked a variety of friends, Nelson DeMille, Ann Perry, C.J. Box, John Connolly, and so on, to write stories for me. And I was talking to Brad, and I said, would you consider writing a biblio mystery? And he said, yeah, I would. And we started talking, and Brad and I commonly meet for lunch. I would say probably once a month when God is good. And we chat and we talk for long periods of time. And I remember vividly, he was talking about this story that he was writing, and it was getting longer and longer. And we were talking about the plot and all that. And at one point, I remember we were sitting at the Nick with a drink in front of us. And I said, this is too good for a short story. And you said, I've been thinking exactly the same thing. And that story was too good just to be a short story, and it became The Forgers.
Wow. And you're one of the great short story experts. I mean, you have edited incredible numbers of anthologies and obviously love short stories. Was it hard for you to say this is not going to be a short story, it's too good, it needs to be bigger?
It was hard because I was losing a good short story. But my friendship with Brad came first, and I saw this as a novel, as he did. It's not like only one of us saw this, he did. But later he came to do another short story for the series. This is what they look like. It's called The Nature of My Inheritance, and he wrote a wonderful short story anyway. But then I also got to publish the novel, and so it was really just a great thing for all of us. It went to second printing. It was a very successful book. I think we sold it in 7, 8 countries, right, Brad?
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
It was interesting. By the time I gave Otto 90 pages, I believe, something like that. And by the time Otto agreed, we agreed, this is a novel, I was already way past that. I was like on page 120 or something at that point. The book just wanted to be a novel. It's just the Forgers wanted to be a novel. Although when I did complete the first draft of the Forgers, I knew I owed Otto a book, so I turned right around and immediately wrote for him that the bibliomystery that he just showed you, which I really love doing as well.
So when you say it was too good to be a short story, too good how? There were too many plot lines, too many characters, too much layering, too much what?
I don't think I would use the word good myself, because I think, it was too complicated. It was just, it really wanted to keep going. There was a place where you could have a terminal point in the narrative, right around 90 or 100 pages in manuscript. But I really wanted, my curiosity chased well beyond that. I just wanted to keep going with these people and see just how far we could get with it. And so it was good, but it was also just unfinished. I mean, it still really wanted to complete itself. Interestingly, now that you say it, once this book was completed, The Forgers, curiosity brought me back to wanting to go further, even with Forger's Daughter now. So not only was it not done by the time I showed it to Otto as a potential bibliomystery for his series, but it didn't seem to be done even when we published The Forgers. So it went on, and it's still going on.
And I think you're right. I think the word good is probably the wrong word. I mean, it was too rich. There was just too much potential that couldn't be fully explored and presented in short form. It needed more space. And I thought you did it deliberately. I'm sorry, we're not talking to only each other. Sorry, there's people out there. Forgive me. I thought Brad had deliberately set up a sequel, because at the end, he introduced the daughter. And I said, oh, I see you're opening the door to a sequel, The Forger's Daughter. And Brad said, no, that really wasn't my intention, but yeah, it seems like a good idea.
So Otto, you practically coined the term bibliomystery. I mean, you absolutely love books about books, or where books are key components of what interests the characters and the plots and so forth. Were you in part engaged with this one because of the forgery? Is the engine for the plot?
Either he's frozen or he's thinking really hard about this, Barbara.
He's frozen. He'll be back.
I'm sorry, but unfortunately, my screen freezes up occasionally.
That's okay.
So I didn't hear a lot of what you just said. If you asked me a question and I didn't answer it, sorry.
No, it's okay. It happens a lot when you do Zoom. We're all used to it. My question really was, gosh, what was my question? That's a really good point.
You were saying I was the inventor of the word bibliomystery, which I'm not, but I certainly latched onto it because I love the background of books in a book. I mean, it just, even before I started reading mysteries years ago, I read a lot of books about books. And in fact, I collected, although I collected a lot of mysteries, about 60,000, but I made a special effort for bibliomysteries, and I wrote a bibliography of bibliomysteries.
Yes, you did. Absolutely. There's a giant, a vintage paperback of bibliomysteries that you have edited. No, I didn't mean that you coined the word, but obviously it is a real passion for you. So my question was, is the forgery background, because there could be bibliomysteries about many things, did that really get you going with The Forger and now The Forger's Daughter? I mean,
Sure. forgeries is a wonderful crime because nobody dies, or not generally.
Right.
But I love con men stories. I love capers. I love that kind of story as well. Kind of non-violent crime. I also like noir and violent crime. I just like crime, apparently. But there's something about the whole notion of books about books and forging books. But forging paintings is fascinating too. Forging signatures, letters, all of these things. This kind of forgery is, and then reading how people do it. And in Brad's The Forger's Daughter, I mean, you get a lesson in how to forge printing, and in the Forgers, you get a lesson in what a forger thinks. It is so meticulously researched. I'm not blowing smoke here. I mean, Brad is a friend, but in addition to that, not apart from it, but in addition to that, he does research so meticulously. I'll let him talk about some of the research he did for The Forger's Daughter, because it's so extensive and so excruciatingly detailed, and it shows without slapping you in the face with it. It's just there, and you know that this is absolutely authentic and accurate.
I was drawn to forgery because it's, well, there are murders, there's bloodshed in both books, particularly in Forger's Daughter. But I'm drawn to forgery because, as a subject, because you really have to know your stuff to be a good forger. You have to know chemistry. You have to know about the inks, and you have to know about paper, and you have to know history. You have to be not plausible, probable that what you're forging is the real thing. I always like that line in the U2 song, even better than the real thing. The forger has to think that way. This has got to be better than what Henry James would have done. This has got to be better than what Poe would have written. I mean, it's got to be on a par with that. So you really have to be, you're operating in the world of not even plausibility. I think real forgers, world-class forgers, operate in the world of probability. There was a painting, I should remember this gentleman's name, but he was one of the great, since Otto brings up paintings, forging paintings. What was his name?
Van Meegeren.
I'm sorry?
Van Meegeren. He's the one that forged all
Right.
of the Vermeers and so forth.
Yeah.
He said that if a forgery is left long enough on a museum wall, it becomes the real thing. I like that a lot. If we sit with a forgery long enough, it does somehow morph into the so-called real thing. In fact, forgery intrigues me because it does call into question, like, what is reality all about? You know, and also in Forger's Daughter, as well as The Forgers, there's an investigation or exploration into how we forge ourselves. I mean, Will is not just a forger, but he's a forgery to his wife. His wife doesn't know about half the things he had done. And so, in a way, forgers, the word forge is really also an ancient word. In the 14th century, it was a word that was only positive. It meant, to create something. It's all really good. But over time, it became a complicated. You can forge a head, you can forge a relationship, but also you can forge a document, and it can also mean a fake. So you can be a fake by being a forger, or you can also do something good. So it's a very complicated, multifaceted word, and that right there interests me as well. So there's none of this that I don't find intriguing. And yeah, the research on this book took me not only into the worlds of forgery, but also into the world of Edgar Allan Poe. And I became friendly with a number of Poe experts. I mean, the best in the world. And they helped guide me through the murky world of Edgar Allan Poe too, because he had a capacity to forge himself. I mean, when this book was printed, in 1827, Poe found himself in Boston, kind of hiding out from his father, Allan. Well, his foster father. And that's why he didn't put his name on this first book, Tamerlane. It just says by a Bostonian, because he didn't want his foster father to know where he was. And when he joined the army that same summer, that same year, he entered the army under Edgar A. Perry. So he even forged his own name. He did it when he went to West Point. I mean, he was constantly staying ahead of people he owed gambling debts and all the rest of it. So Poe himself was very, very keen on forging his own personality, forging his identity. So that's of interest to me also in this book. It's a great subject, actually. It really is rich.
Well, provenance is such an important part of successful forgery, and Poe is a guy where he's sort of slippery, so it's difficult to have a clear provenance. I was always fascinated with Van Meegeren because he was so good that I looked this up the other day because I did a little talk about you on Instagram, that he actually forged a painting and sold it to Hermann Goering as an original, which I thought was a highly risky thing to do. But it also made him a hero to the Dutch when it was revealed after the war that he had slipped one by, Goering. But what's interesting is that the forger then becomes collectible. As far as I can work out, that the work of Van Meegeren itself is very collectible. And so it must be true with books. How do you know much more about it than I do? Are there book forgers or whatever who become collectible by themselves?
Thomas J. Wise was one of the great booksellers of his time, and also one of the great forgers, because he created booklets by well-known writers and poets of the 19th century, and passed them off as newly discovered pamphlets, chapbooks, and so on of poetry by important writers. And he had a very, very successful career as a bookseller, but also as a forger. I think he did it really for the sport rather than as a way of earning a living. And he got away with it for many years until John Carter, great bookman, wrote a book called An Inquiry into Certain 19th Century Pamphlets. Was it, Brad? I think you probably know.
Yeah, also there's a long history of forgery going back into the 18th century. A very famous forger named Thomas Chatterton, who forged Shakespeare's, and there's probably the greatest 20th century forger in not doing what Wise did, because Wise printed a lot of these forgeries, but is a guy named Cozy, and Cosey, and Cozy forged everybody from Abraham Lincoln to George Washington. He was so skilled, and including Edgar Allan Poe. And there are cozies that are still floating around on the market that are the bane. He is so good. It is so difficult to tell that it's the bane of serious collectors. In fact, I believe New York Public Library, the Bird Collection, I hope they'll forgive me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. They collect cozy forgeries. I mean, these forgers, you can now, some of these forgers like Chatterton and Cozy and T.J. Wise are actually collectible. They're worth a lot of money in the marketplace as forgeries. So that's a fascinating side to it too.
Is the story about the Confederacy of Dunces an apocryphal story? I don't know the name of the guy, but do you know this story, Otto?
No.
I think, Barbara, that because his Walker Percy was involved in the discovery of that, and Walker Percy is a pretty straight arrow, and the Southern novelist Walker Percy did the moviegoer, and because I have a friend who actually owns a copy of that book that his mother, that was involved, his mother threw a publication party for it, and so unless the mother is sociopathic or somehow psychotic, I think her son actually wrote the book. I mean, didn't it win the Pulitzer Prize? Confederacy of Dunces, posthumously.
It might have, but wherever this was, that was a purveyor of forged signatures, and I cannot remember. It might have been something that John Dunning wrote about. I don't know where I picked it up. In any case, he was doing a very brisk business in autographed copies of famous works, and he came to grief because one day he offered an autographed copy of a Confederacy of Dunces.
Oh yeah, you don't want to do that.
Sure, yeah.
because it's a posthumous publication.
Clearly fell apart in his research.
Barbara, you remind me of something that's very funny because you see forgeries floating around all over the place. I was at a book fair at the Armory. Otto and I have been at the Armory show. It happens, well, back before the pandemic. Well, actually, the last one was right before the pandemic, and a lot of people went home after the fair and got sick. Fortunately, nobody that I know of had died. But one year, I'm standing there with a dealer friend of mine, and I said, "Is that Virginia Woolf over there inscribed?" That doesn't look right to me at all. It's the wrong color ink. She usually used purple ink. This was brown ink, and it was also the American edition of one of her books, and it was inscribed to somebody. But Virginia Woolf had never come to America. She never did any book tour, and it's the last thing she would ever do. The only inscribed copies I know of really are to family and very close friends or the Bloomsbury Circle. So this guy had this book for $12,000 or $15,000. A very rare, first American edition of Virginia Woolf so-and-so. And my friend, who will remain unnamed, he went over, took a look, and he came back and said, "That is as forged as a $3 bill." And I said, it's in the biggest fair, international book fair. I said, "Should we tell the guy?" And he said, "No, I'm not going to tell him, or you?" And I said, "No, we'll just let him figure it out for himself." But their forgeries float around all the time. But yeah, you don't want to be a stupid forger and forge a book by this posthumous. I mean, that's what I go back to. You have to be very sharp to be a successful forger. You have to really know your history. You have to know the history of the writer. Like Virginia Woolf didn't come to America ever, so if you're going to forge a book, don't forge it like signed in New York in the wrong colored ink.
Right.
It's sloppy.
Yeah, it's just sloppy. That's
So Otto, you're the publisher of The Forger's Daughter. Tell me a little bit about the book cover, because I seem to recall there's something significant about the way this book looks.
Yeah, Brad and I had some disagreements about the cover. The cover is the jacket is an extremely authentic is authentic. It can't be extremely or mildly. It's authentic. It is a copy of a real first edition of Tamerlane, and I didn't like. And I'm wrong. I've accepted that I'm wrong. But the jacket, if I could show it here, it looks like it has a big stain in the center of it. And that's because the original Tamerlane, from which this was taken, has that big stain. And when I first saw it on the screen and then in galleys, I said, it looks like somebody put a big glass or plate and has stained the cover of your book. And Brad stuck to it. He says, "No, this is an important copy of this book. We really should stay with it." And he was right, of course. And that's what it has. And since then, in the published form, it's really come together, and it feels really right to me. And I really have come to love this cover after arguing with Brad relentlessly about it.
Otto, you should know better by now.
Yeah.
By the way, I have a facsimile right here of it's too clean and it's the wrong color, but that's what the original looks like. Is that close enough that you can see?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Really?
Yeah, see it's by a Bostonian and other poems. So what the designer brilliantly did was took that gorgeous, frame, and then there are only 12 copies of this book that are known to exist. I'm hoping that another one will surface because of my book, but you'll never know. They tend to surface once a generation. And this copy of The Forger's Daughter is a final version of it. You can see that it's too large to be a stain. It has to be like a big jug or something on there. But it's somebody did actually sit down. I'd love to think that it was a glass of whiskey or something in the 19th century. Used this.
It'll be a bowl of whiskey.
It'd be a bowl of whiskey. But somebody used it as a coaster at some point in its past. It's one of the two privately owned copies of Tamerlane. The other copies, there's one in the British Library. The rest are, there's two in the Berg collection here. There's one in the Alderman Library in University of Virginia. Was stolen years ago, and it's never been recovered. So, and then another one is in the copies of an anonymous owner. So, really, there are only 10 copies out there that you can actually see. I was fortunate enough to handle 3 of those 10, which was a real privilege. And the copy that's owned by a collector whose name I'm happy to say is Susan Taine, the greatest Edgar Allan Poe collector alive today. And Susan was generous enough to let us, reproduce her copy, which has quite a story, this copy. Reproduce her copy on the cover of A Forger's Daughter. All these Poe scholars that I worked with too, but Susan's friends with all of them. It's quite a brilliant, I won't call them a mafia, they're too nice. When I worked on Beethoven for my last book, there was a Beethoven element there. That Beethoven group was a mafia, international mafia. But the Poe scholars that I worked with were quite wonderful. And I thought I'd run into trouble when I told them I'm forging the book is about a forgery of Tamerlane. And they're obviously steeped in Poe, so they loved that idea. Oh yeah, a forgery of Tamerlane. But all the Poe materials in the book, all the historical data, all the rest of it is exactly right. I mean, that's why I have to be so detailed, right down to the weather. I was keeping track because the book happened 2 years ago right now. It was going on, the book was occurring right about now. And so I wrote it not far from the Hudson Valley where the book is partly set. So everything I could put in there that was not forged, was not artificial, that was not inaccurate, I did. So the book is very historically, centered and based, so that I could get away with my fantastical forgery of the book.
Well, we really ought to talk.
I love the cover myself. Yeah.
We really ought to talk about the book itself, but I wanted to ask Otto, since we've gone through all this. So, as an editor, you rely on his research. It sounds to me like you didn't really have to do much copy editing for this book, or am I wrong?
You're not wrong. I'm not a copy editor. I'm an editor. There really is a difference. Copy editors are
Right.
a whole different group of highly educated and fanatical people who love to catch a little mistake somewhere. But to try to find a mistake in Brad's book, I said this very early on. The research that Brad does, you would think that he was writing nonfiction. And he's not. He's writing fiction, but the background is so meticulously researched that I don't even consider. I didn't for the Forgers, and I didn't for the Forger's Daughter think about doing any research to check up on facts about dates and references to things of the era. I knew that Brad not only got them right, but checked them and rechecked them and then checked them with 4 other experts in that field, as he did for the Prague Sonata with the Beethoven people, and I never even questioned anything here, because I know this is one author that I never have to check facts.
Well, I misspoke. I was actually thinking of you in your role as publisher, whether you felt that it needed to go to copy editing, but obviously
Copy
not.
edit every author, no matter how meticulous about their writing they are, needs to have a copy editor. And I think Brad, even Brad, the most meticulous writer I work with, would agree with that.
Oh, I wouldn't feel. I love copy editors myself.
Yeah, I do too.
I love it when they can find something. But this book was the manuscript. The final manuscript was read by the director of the Edgar Allan Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia, Chris Sempner, who's a world-class Edgar Allan Poe scholar, and a lovely man named Richard Copley up in near Boston, who is the foremost Poe expert, I think, in the world, and he's currently working on what I believe will be a definitive, insofar as you can be definitive about anything with regard to Poe, biography. So we can all look forward to that. I don't know when he'll finish, but I think he's somewhere in the maybe 1840. I don't want to get that wrong, but they both read it, and they found just for instance, just for an example, I mentioned Arthur Gordon Pym, which is one of Poe's books, that there were no known copies inscribed, and I was told that. I had it in there that there was an inscribed one. One Poe expert said, no inscribed ones anywhere in the world. Then another Poe expert said, but you're wrong. There is one. And he told me exactly where, so I had to write them, and I'd make sure it was there. And so, yeah, I mean, even if you have an expert helping you, experts also disagree. So you have to really go beyond that and, check even on the experts. But yeah, copy editors they're people who are just like they're sort of up there in the clouds, and yet they can look down on us and they know all the facts. I just adore copy editors.
So tell us a bit what the setup for The Forger's Daughter is, because, if you're doing like a 2-minute book pitch, what would you say?
Well, the elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Will, who really is only named once in The Forgers. We have a man who for 20 years, he got caught doing forgeries. He has now moved back from Ireland. He's living in New York with his lovely wife, who is a bookseller, and their daughter, and he's reformed. He's truly given up forgery, and it's a hard habit to kick, because there's a line in both books that I repeat on purpose: once a forger, always a forger. And Will, however, is confronted at the beginning of this book. His past comes back to haunt him, because a man who had injured him at the end of The Forgers is out of prison now, and he is forcing Will's hand. He's forcing Will to come back into the trade, even if for just this one project of forging a copy of Tamerlane. And unfortunately, this guy Slater, who was just out of prison, knows Will's biggest secret, and he could bring Will down in a heartbeat. So Will is literally, despite his best, efforts to stay away from forgery, he is forced. It's ruin one way or ruin another way. So he has to make a choice of what to do here. So he accepts the job, and it gets more and more complicated, because he's not used to doing it anymore. He's not as good as he was, and his daughter is a kind of a prodigy. So I don't want to give away too much of the plot here, but she gets involved too, whether she wants to or not. So it's that it follows. And the book is also narrated by both the wife and the husband. I started writing the book in the daughter's voice. That didn't work out. I didn't like that. So I went back to Will's voice, but he proves himself in The Forgers to be the quintessential unreliable narrator. I mean, I thought, I can't do another book with nobody trusts the guy out of the gates. So the wife works as a kind of counterpoint with his wife. And then we get into this complication where she knows things he doesn't know. He knows a number of things that she doesn't know. And it really enriches, I think, the whole plot as they go forward. And to me, it's mimetic. It's like very realistic, because all of us know things that others don't know. And so the reader, in a way, becomes a bit of a voyeur on both of these characters in the book, because the reader can see all. And so it worked out very nicely, this counterpoint. That's the basic thing. He's forced back into his old ways, his bad habits.
So Otto, did you read this book as he wrote it, or did you wait and read it, or did he send it to you as a complete manuscript when he was done?
I've never been a fan of reading bits and pieces of books because time is so limited in my life. So if I read 30 pages and then later I get 60 pages, I have to read the first 30 again, and then again and again. So
He's frozen again for a moment.
You know what else?
fairly good sense of what was coming.
So
Also in this case, if I had given out of the first 30 pages, and then gave him 60 pages afterwards, the first 30 would not only would he have forgotten them, but they would be completely different anyway. So
Yeah.
I kind of feel I put him through that. You know, let me give him a book.
I only ask the question because we often at these interviews wind up getting questions about process. And, you know, it's interesting how authors and editors work together. I'm like Otto. I mean, I can't stand to read so many pages and then have to read them all over again and then all over again by the time
But also, as a publisher, it is common for me to have an option clause in a contract where, in order for me to make an offer on the next book under option, the author is supposed to give me the first 2 or 3 chapters and then a complete outline for the rest of the book. I don't have a single author in the 40 years I've been publishing where I make them do that, because the idea of a writer giving me a complete synopsis is crazy, or outline, because they always change it as the book progresses. They find new things to write about. They see an opportunity to enrich a character that they hadn't expected in the past. You know, Tony Hillerman used to joke about that. He would say, I sit down and I write the most meticulous outline to give to my editor, and then I totally ignore it the rest of the way. And I understand that fully.
I think as publishers, perhaps not you, but many publishers just don't want to out for the money unless they think they're going to have a real product at the end of it.
Well, it helps if you trust your author,
Right.
and there's not a hope in the world that put on the calendar that I have to worry about what the outline is going to be or sample chapters because I know that he's going to deliver a fabulous book.
You bet. So one of the things I thought was really interesting about this book was the same thing I referred to as kind of slippery morality. But, you know, this is a world of as we've already said, forgeries and shadows and, you know, suspect provenances and other things. So, you know, you said you like books about cons and all sorts of things, Otto. Does this sort of fall in that direction? It does, doesn't it?
Oh, of course. You're seeing a crime being committed, and the good con novels or the good caper novels, because of a certain vagueness of the edges of morality, if the writer is good at what he does, as Brad is, you wind up rooting for somebody who's committing a crime. Now, in this book, in the Forger's Daughter, there was no choice. The protagonist had no choice. He had to do what he was doing in order to save his life, if not literally save it, but close to. But in the Forgers, that wasn't the case. Certainly not in the beginning. And you were rooting for him because he took such care, took such pride in the work that he was doing, and he understood his mindset for that book, and you rooting for him to write this magnificent inscription in a book that never actually happened in real life. So yeah, and you know, and in Donald Westlake's book, if you don't root for Dortmunder, there's something wrong with you, even though he's a thief. So yeah, there's something to be said for a talented writer bringing you into the mind of the criminal and making you root for the criminal, although in real life you might not want to.
Well, you edited one of my favorite authors, Thomas Perry, who has been known to have some very interesting cons in his books too. So Bradford, I mean, it's an interesting scale, where you're weighing, where Will is weighing his survival, so to speak, against committing a crime. You know, it's a complicated sort of thing for him, but it's also difficult for the people around him to evaluate his daughter, his wife, if she knew what were going on. Everybody has to make choices in order for this to work out.
Well, or they're being forced to make choices that they either know about or don't know about. Yeah, it's a complicated mess, actually, that Will has slipped into a very gnarly situation, and he tries to make the best of it. Will, I'm fond of Will. People ask me, oh, he's done these things, and he's not just the forgery, but in the other book, he's done some bad things. I can't help myself. I just adore Will. It's like, he seems like family. I feel like the mother, like, oh, my son is such a good boy. He would never do that, I adore this character, and I love his voice, and I love his skills. Now I'm very fond, too, of his daughter and the wife. I love the whole family, although they're, I fully intend to go ahead with one more. I just see no way around it at this point. And that I did sort of set up for a third volume because I'm still curious. What's going to happen with these people? What's going to happen with the daughter? So, yes, one can't help but sort of love one, not because it's my creation, but because I simply like him, and I know the complexities of what he's dealing with, and morality is a very complicated thing, and Will is definitely someone you could loathe, or but you can also see the side of him that's worthy of veneration. Even, I mean, he's a very skilled practitioner, and he knows books, which I love too. I'm like Otto. I'm a huge book collector. I've been a bibliomaniac since I was in my late teens, and books. I've done almost everything with a book you can do. I used to be even a bookbinder for a while. I don't know whether you knew that one, Otto, but so Will's love of books, and his father was a great book collector. I kind of feel like I guess I look askance at some of the things he does, but when I'm writing it, when he's doing some of his worst things, I think as a writer, I'm weirdly, I think proud of him would be the wrong word, but I can admire where he's coming from, let's put it that way, in a very dark way.
Where better than in crime to explore all these fascinating topics, morality, social. I remember somebody said once that, great mysteries cut along the edge of social change, and I think that's very true. It's wonderful the things that you can learn and explore in the medium of fiction. Patrick has just reappeared, and he may have a question or two from the audience to bring us forth.
Well, let's see. Actually, I just have one. We have quite a few people watching, but I think they're shy. Okay, Melanie asks, Brad, which came first in conceiving the plot? The family story around Maisie and Nicole, or Edgar Allan Poe himself?
Family story came first.
Yep.
Definitely. I mean, I'm glad I had the Prague Sonata to write and to finish, and it was a huge project, 700-page manuscript plus, because it gave me time to just mull over. Maisie is not in the first book. Nicole is the actual forger's daughter. That's the titular daughter here, and Maisie's kind of too young. Although Maisie's very much part of the book world herself, whether she knows it or not, she doesn't know it. So yeah, I would say family first. Family, the voices, the background of the family, and then I didn't want to, since the first book was really largely Arthur Conan Doyle. That was one of Will's real skills, is forging Conan Doyle, not only just letters and things, but manuscripts. So he added to the Conan Doyle, the canon with some manuscript.
A chapter of The Hound of the Baskervilles.
There you go, a chapter of The Hound of the Baskervilles. So I didn't want to go back to that. I mean, I wanted this to be more of an American book, because that was full of Yeats, Henry James, and largely Conan Doyle. So I knew I wanted to be an American author, and I thought, well, who better than the author of Murders in the Rue Morgue and The Purloined Letter and Mystery of Marie Rosé? I mean, who better than the father of detective fiction? Even though in this book, there aren't any, well, the detectives are fairly hapless in this book, but we don't see much of them anyway. I wouldn't call this a detective novel, would you, Otto? I don't think it really is a novel of detection as much. Maybe the reader's the detective in the book. But yeah, I started with family. And then when I alighted upon Poe, because I was very interested in that first book. I had known about it. And then I found out that a friend of mine was a friend of the greatest Poe collector in the world, and I went up and met with her. And I knew that Poe was my person, because I'd always loved Poe. And, you know, Poe is a weird forefather in a way, but those three tales in particular are just extraordinary. It's amazing to me how much Poe got done in such a short period of time. Between 1830 and in the 1840s, he didn't have much time as a writer. But yeah, that's the answer.
Either. I know it. I often think if there were one person I could bring back, I would bring back Mozart. I just can hardly bear the thought of all that vanished when he probably had so much more than he could have done. But that's me. Anything else?
I was just going to ask, Brad, have you ever come across Poe's Eureka?
Yeah, I've seen a first edition of Eureka up at Susan Tain's in her collection. So funny because Susan was so great. Her librarian Gabriel and Susan, I would actually go up there. I would never do this with Otto, but I went up there and I would read them passages, sitting in her apartment, reading them passages from the manuscript that had to do with Edgar Allan Poe, so they could hear it and they could identify if I had done anything, made any mistakes, because I didn't want to have them read it, so I just read it to them. And there's one moment in the book where Will says, when he's showing the original, the 13th Tamerlane, showing Will the original, and Will says at one point, "You don't see it? Nothing, no bells ringing, no Eureka?" So there's all kinds of Poe puns throughout the book, which you don't need to notice or even, respond to one way or the other. But Eureka is actually in the book too. The word Eureka is right there when we first see it. But yeah, what about Eureka interests you?
It's just kind of a wild. It's his nonfiction sort of. How would you describe it? His exegesis, maybe, or something like that. He just seemed like he was wildly ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
Yeah, he was. I'm still curious about how he died. It'll be very interesting to see what Richard comes up with, because there's a lot of everybody considers Poe to be drunk, alcoholic, and I think it's coming out that he was allergic to alcohol, but I don't know that he drank the great quantities that he's supposed to have had. I think it didn't take much to get Poe, into a bad place. Let's put it that way. But yeah, Eureka is a strange one. Poe wrote a bunch of strange things, and I'll tell you what, as a nonfiction writer, as a reviewer, man, you didn't want to get on his bad side, because he was a vicious, vicious reviewer. You would know if Poe reviewed you and gave you a bad review. It's funny. I mean, Poe had of all people, Poe had not a rivalry, but a bad relationship, we'll call it, with Ralph Waldo Emerson, of all people. So Emerson had to poo-poo Poe. Oh, that's scribbler of bad poems, but Poe attacked one of Emerson's books. It's he was it was a bright, beautiful, white-hot fire of a life that he led. Who wrote a very interesting piece about Poe that you wouldn't necessarily encounter is the wonderful fantasy writer Angela Carter. She wrote a short story about Poe, and in it she tries to get inside of like Poe's background as a the child, the baby of a stage mother who he grew up in the theater, and so like for Poe the world was already fantastical to begin with. It was theatrical. It was a world with painted facades and painted backgrounds and painted backdrops and theatrical voices and people dressed up in costumes and things. So really interesting guy. One of the things that I saw at Susan's place is she owns the wedding ring. I hope she does. I mean, her collection is beautifully cataloged in a book. But the wedding ring of his child bride, and that wedding ring is about that big. So I can't imagine anybody's fingers being quite so tiny.
Well, Otto, it seems to me that what we have over here in Bradford Morrow is a dream author for you. Would that be true?
I'm sorry, does my screen, are you talking to me? My screen.
That's okay. I was waiting for you to come back to life. I said, it seems to me that Bradford Morrow is an absolute dream author for you as an editor. I mean, everything that he has had to say today just reinforces my thought that would be true.
Largely, he can be difficult because he knows exactly what he wants, and sometimes we disagree. And when that happens, it becomes a little bit testier than it does when we're having lunch or our second bottle of wine.
Nonetheless, it's easy to see that you have a great relationship and how much you both enjoyed working on these two books together.
I would publish Brad for the rest of my life with joy.
Well, I certainly hope that it will be a long one for both of you, and we'll have lots more books. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's really been a pleasure to listen to both of you and to meet you, Bradford, and to see Otto again. Because without conventions and stuff, it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's true. It is. It's good to be here, and nice to see you, Brad.
You too, Otto. It's been a while. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, I think, right?
Well, we sold out of the first group of books that you signed, so you're going to come back tomorrow to sign more.
Excellent. Well, we're about to as well, so we're very grateful that you took the time to do that for us, Bradford. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody watching it for spending part of your afternoon with us. There will be a podcast available soon, and please recommend this to your friends. And don't forget, we still have a few autographed copies for you to buy.